mentioned at the beginning. Number one, please make sure you remember to sign in on the guest register at some point today, perhaps at our next break or when we break for lunch, so we have a record of everyone who's attended. And also just a reminder, when you're speaking to the microphone, please make sure you get your face within a couple of inches of it. Sometimes if we're far away, we can't be heard. And as everyone's taking their seats, we're now ready to transition to a series of updates on the various health studies. Harry, will you make the comments at the beginning? Oh, sorry. Yes, Rick. The soil vapor intrusion update first, starting with Rick. Mike. Okay, this morning, my name is Rick Gillen, by the way. This morning we had two updates. We've got two projects within the division that we've talked about over the last couple of CAP meetings. One is the project on reevaluating drinking water exposures, and also the project to look at exposures as a result of soil vapor intrusion. So I'll be presenting first, and my focus will be on the reevaluation of drinking water exposures. When I'm finished, I'll take questions, and then Commander Fletcher will present on the soil vapor intrusion project. So, as we've discussed before, our reevaluation of drinking water exposures, we're looking at exposures that result from drinking, from showering. We're looking at exposures from use of swimming pools, both marines in training and also recreational use. We know that the swimming pool that was used, the indoor swimming pool that was used for providing aquatic training for marines, was used for recreational use after hours and on weekends. Thanks to your input, we're also looking at laundry workers. We know that there were several laundry facilities on base, and those laundry facilities used drinking water that was contaminated. So you had people washing laundry. You also had people operating steam presses. We're looking at those exposures. We're also looking at food preparation and dishwashers. The method is we had people standing over serving lines. We had people cooking and also people washing dishes. So we're looking at those exposures as well. Now, as we discussed in all of our presentations, we're taking a conservative approach to estimate exposures. We're looking at maximum contaminant concentrations. We are using the information, the modeling results that Horace Massillon and his staff developed. And we are incorporating that information into our reevaluation of drinking water exposures. And Jerry, I see that you have a question.
On your list of high exposures, you have the food prep and the people, laundry workers. You also need to add healthcare people at the hospitals and the clinics, because these people were constantly washing their hands. They were high usage of water, high exposure.
And I believe, Rob, you know best, but I believe we've accounted for frequent hand washing.
Yeah, works evaluation.
Okay, and I should introduce the operator of the slides, Rob Robinson. He is one of the lead health assessors on the development of this public health assessment. And, as we get together every quarter, we provide updates on the progress of these projects. We discussed over the last couple of meetings about developing some models to help us with our evaluation of exposures. We've developed those models. Those models, we're looking showering. We're looking at exposures resulting in training in those indoor swimming pools. We're looking at swimming exposures, and we're also looking at workers in the mess halls and the laundry facilities. Those models were developed by staff that work with Morris, and one of our monitors, Jason Sommer, is here in the audience. As I had mentioned, we're incorporating the model results into our public health evaluation. And we're currently readying the public health assessment for release, for review, or for release, for peer review release. It'll go through the ATSDR clearance process. We've had within the branch, so several issues are currently being addressed, and that document should be put into the peer review process. I guess I'm jumping ahead on my slides here. If you could come, okay. So we developed a draft document. We've done quite a bit of review on that. We expect to begin the peer review process in the winter of 2015. And the CAP will be one of the peer reviewers for that document. And then we expect to release the document for public comment late spring of 2015. Any questions on our development of the public health assessment looking at drinking water exposures? If not, Chris, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Good morning. I'll provide a brief update on some of the changes and progress we've made with document review since our last CAB meeting. Next slide, please. So currently we're finalizing all the sub-indices. As I've discussed in previous meetings, we're creating a document index for each subgroup of data. So in other words, as you see on the slide, each subgroup from the Department of Navy and U.S. Marine Corps will have its own index of all the documents we have from those sources, as well as an index for the EPA documents, those that we found with the state in North Carolina DENR, the documents we're using from ATSDR, basically the stuff from Morris and the water modeling, as well as the documents you've provided. Next slide, please. So the final product of that we'll have a master index and then all sub-indices, all within an Excel spreadsheet. So those of you that are familiar with Excel, you know that it's got different worksheets or tabs at the bottom of the master index and then a sub-index for each subsource. That's because each subsource has, there's a lot of various information included from different sources about the documents they have. Not all of those match up with other sources, so what you can see here on the slide, the data columns that do match that we found from every source are file name, document title. File name is the PDF, the actual electronic file name. Document title, date, author, notes. Those do match up. So next slide, please. You can see here, this is a screenshot of kind of the top, the way it's looking right now. This is still in draft, and we're, like I said, we're finalizing all this. So you can see how the master index will look. We've got the file names, again, that's the electronic file, document title, and date. But what we're doing with this, as you see kind of on the bottom of the two images there, the bottom right, a column for EPA and a column for ATSDR. Next slide, please. Let's continue out to the right. So this is a rather wide spreadsheet. What we'll do with these columns is just simply put a check mark under each of the sources where the document is also found. Actually, no, we're not going to put a check mark. I'm going to take that back. We'll put the file name. So as we've gone through all these tens of thousands of files, we found that many files are identical, but have different file names or document titles as they were stored in different sets of data. So to help everyone understand how to help everyone compare files to files, we'll have the file name that we use in the left column, so in our file name column, but then we'll put the file name as found in other data sources beneath those data source titles. So now that's a mouthful. Next slide, please. So the next steps we have are to, again, complete the file index, and we're going to ensure that there's a one-to-one match with files to file title on the master index. What we really want to be able to guarantee is that if you're looking for a file, you can find it, no doubt. We really don't want any holes to be in this at all. It won't do anyone any good. Following that, we'll do the keyword search. So when we shared the list with you guys in November, with the CAT that is, in November last year, we had 172 keywords. Since then, I've been wrapping up some emails that came in towards the end of the year last year, and I think I've added another 8 or 10 keywords, so we're a little over 180, or right at 180 keywords. We didn't get any feedback from the CAP on that as far as whether or not you liked the keywords we had, or if there was anything additional you wanted us to add to that. Is there anything you guys wanted to mention in this forum? Okay, so we'll do each keyword search with the final list of PDFs, where we're going to do our best to remove all the duplicates, so it'll be as small a group of documents as we can get it. Each keyword search will give us a list of documents where that keyword was identified, and at that point we'll have a person go through and open manually each document, verify whether there's data or not to be extracted, and then eventually extract that data. Once the data is extracted, we'll load that into a database, and at that point we'll be able to do our normal summary statistics and data analysis and move forward at that point. Next slide. So that's pretty much it for me for the update. So to kind of relay this back to the discussion earlier about the relational database, what we've done is gone through more than 60,000 document titles at this point. We've requested documents of interest based on that review and have, I think, more than 30,000 actual electronic files. What's taking so long is, like I alluded to earlier with the master index, many of these files have the same file name. In some cases they don't, but they're still identical files. So we've been opening each of these files, comparing them to each other, and then doing our best to remove duplicates so that it makes keyword searching and data extraction go as quickly as possible by having as few documents as possible to extract data from. So once we're done extracting the data and we enter that into the SQL Server database that we'll use, at that point we more or less have a relational database. It'll be searchable by date and site ID and some of the things that I mentioned in last fall's CAT meeting. So we're on the way to that at ATSDR already.
Just one question and a little brief history for Dr. Pricey. We had references in a report that was issued in May of 1988 from a Department of Navy contractor, Environmental Science and Engineering, who did the RIFS, Remedial Investigation Feasibility Study for Camp LeJeune, and they recommended that until the contamination sites are totally remediated, they had precautionary measures which needed to take place and be undertaken to alleviate any further human exposures from the contaminants. One of those was doing underground workspace and ambient air quality sampling indoors over buildings that were located above these plumes. We have documents that show where the Department of Navy and Camp LeJeune officials announced to the public in court-recorded documents of meeting minutes where they've accepted those and actually announced that they were going to conduct those samples. We have a paper trail of letters going from Camp LeJeune's Assistant Chief of Staff of Facilities to the Navy Facilities Engineering Command asking for funds to contract that air quality sampling to be done. That was in October of 1988. That's the end of the trail. ATSDR requested those documents because they're not anywhere in the files. The paper trail ended there, and they got a negative response. So my question is, are you guys putting some kind of disclaimer in here where you've asked for these documents that are evidenced in the record to protect the agency?
I do have emails, say, where we sent the request in writing, and it's come back in writing with the Navy's response. So, which is the response, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is just because we don't have the documents doesn't mean the testing didn't happen or not. I think their response is something to that effect. Yeah, well, their response is what they give us. We'll include it in our document, but.
Okay, good. I mean, you got to cover yourself.
Chris, can I suggest that if there's a citation for a document in a report or something, you put it in the database as a title. If you're doing this, great.
It's where we are.
And then you just put, that's where then you document, ask for it, we're given it. So we know that there's a document, we just haven't found it yet. So I don't want to lose track of that trail that ends. Because those documents might appear somewhere in some other place. But we'd like to have a list of all that stuff and at least some documentation in a database that we asked for it and it wasn't available.
And we are gathering that as well as even when the Navy says they can't find it or whatever happened to it, we still intend to use those document titles as a keyword search term. So we're still going to search for it and see what we can find.
And in all fairness to Chris and Rick, I mean, they did diligently go after to get these documents and try to ferret out where they may be. But as with, a lot of the key documentation with Camp LeJeune, once you drill down to that point where you can get, oh, Eureka, here it is, it's gone. Another example is the well logbooks that show that Morris had to fight this with his water model. The actual well logbooks from Camp LeJeune for the contaminated wells mysteriously disappeared and never were found.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I didn't mean to in any way suggest.
Oh no, I wouldn't think it. I just
you weren't doing their job. I just want to understand myself.
And but yeah, that's something we've been fighting, and it goes back to that Sphinx comment that I made earlier this morning. If you don't ask the right question in the right manner at the proper celestial alignment, you're not get the answer. And there's been several examples. Probably the classic one was Senators Burr and Hagan asking the Navy how much fuel they lost. Well, the answer back from the Navy was, well, according to our inventory records, we lost 30 to 50,000 gallons of fuel. Period. Nothing more. Then we found out, oh, it's 1.5 million gallons of fuel. But we didn't ask the correct question. And the answer, the caveat was, according to our inventory records. And like with the well log books that Morris had to go through trying to do the water model, I've got well log books from Camp Geiger that go back to the 1950s. That was given to me by our water treatment plant operator. So why are those books in existence but not the critical ones that we need? And that's been one of the hard issues that we've been fighting the Navy and the Marine Corps with the documentation so you guys can do your job. Because without these readings, without these samplings, without the well log books, it handcuffs y'all's efforts to get the truth out.
Well, everything and anything that goes to the Department of the Navy as far as requests or for information or anything pertaining to Camp LeJeune water, it goes to a platoon of lawyers. And they gin up their lawyerese responses for headquarters, and then that's what you get back.
And I want to say that, this is where I think our work is so important, not just because of Camp LeJeune, but to set standards, because right now in Red Hill, Hawaii, the Department of Navy is refusing to take care of the tanks in those huge tanks at Red Hill. And they're fighting with the local health department who is saying, no, you need to do this. And the Department of Navy is saying, well, we don't think we need to. And they're saying, oh, we don't really know. We lost this much inventory of fuel, and we know it got into the ground. But everybody knows, all these scientists are fighting on their own, trying to say, well, no, you don't know that's how much fuel you lost. And if they lose their drinking water supply on that island, that's gone. I mean, if that's contaminated, and that's in the shadow of Pearl Harbor, and that's happening right now. And that's off the radar, but I guarantee you it won't be for long. So what we do now have a say as well. So I think it's really important.
But that's only Oahu. It's a small island.
True.
I'm sure the Department of Navy would like them to move everybody off of Oahu and let them have it. You know.
They can play golf. Just don't sprinkle the.
Any final questions for Rick?
Yes, I have a question. So both of these are historical. Clearly, the vapor is a historical database, and the public health assessment, I assume, is historical, re-looking at the historical exposures that might have occurred. So this raises the issue whether, when this is all said and done, there'll be a reevaluation of the exposures for mortality study, first of all, and second of all, for the oncoming incidence study.
And we are looking at both historical and more current exposures, so we want to cover both time periods.
So presumably these will be fit into a revamped exposure assessment for those two studies, or whatever other studies might occur.
Yeah, as far as how
I see Frank is kind of.
Yeah, I was going to say, as far as how the health assessments are used to support study activities, I would turn to my colleagues in the health studies program for an answer on that.
I don't expect the drinking water exposure estimates to change. You're basing them on Morris's model. Right. So, no. We're still going to base the mortality and cancer incidence studies on the drinking water exposures. The cohort that we're following is based on that as well. So we're not basing it on vapor intrusion for a couple of reasons. One, we don't know who were in those buildings. In fact, we really don't know how long people worked at the base. The civilian mortality study had a long discussion with our point of contact at the Marine Corps a couple of days ago, because they were saying that we meaning the other division now, was trying to use the civilian mortality study to determine how long people worked at the base. You can't do that because it's truncated, the cohort's truncated, so you really can't get it. The only reason that data is in the civilian mortality study is to compare it to Pendleton to show that there's similarities between the two bases. If you really want to know how long, who was in these buildings, and how long they were, you're going to have to, as I said to the Marine Corps guy, you're going to have to talk to the people who actually worked in those buildings. There is no data, as far as I know, on who worked in those buildings and how long they worked there, right? And so we can't really incorporate that into our study. And I don't think there's going to be that many people exposed in terms of enough to study. There are enough people for health effects and so on. I'm not trying to diminish that. I'm just saying it won't be enough for us to do either a separate study or at least I don't think there will be enough. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't know. We really don't know how many workers in those buildings that had vapor intrusion. So is that answered, or do you have?
I think it does. And then, so there presumably was not either no data or minimal exposure in the housing to the vapor intrusion. Is that correct?
No, this is your job.
Turn that over to my colleague.
Okay. At this point, I don't think I can say. I mean, we've got a lot of data to go through. A lot of analysis still needs to be done. So I don't want to speculate. But given that a lot of the contamination was close to the fuel farm, and most of those buildings were warehouses and such, it's probably very limited in residential areas.
There was only one housing area that actually had a physical plume, and that was Terrace.
Right, and I don't think that the vapor intrusion. I think the vapor intrusion would be dwarfed by the drinking water exposure. So I don't think it would add that much more to the exposure they got from the drinking water itself. When you were talking about 215 parts per billion PCE measured, and the average monthly got up to at least 170,
180, right, Morris? I can't remember exactly how high.
At Terra.
Yeah, the monthly max.
The monthly modeling max was 183.
Yeah, 170, yeah. So I think that would dwarf the the vapor intrusion, any vapor intrusion in Terra Terrace. Would I agree? Yeah.
Excellent. Any final questions? Okay.
Well, I did.
Oh, please.
Morris, just what you just said, I guess you totally hear it.
Okay. I'm Morris Masley. I'm with the Division of Community Health Investigations. And along with our staff, conducted the water modeling that was published in 2013. I believe the question was from someone, what was the maximum reconstructed drinking water concentration at Terra Terrace? And my answer was 183 micrograms per liter, and you can find that in the Terra Terrace Chapter A report, either on graphs or in the appendix listing month by month, which is on the ATSDR website.
Thank you. Thanks very much. We're ready to transition to Perry for updates on the health studies.
Hey everybody, just a few quick updates on our health studies that are still in progress. We have the male breast cancer study, so we received and responded to the peer reviewer comments. We have 4 sets of those, and the revised manuscript and responses are currently being reviewed by the agency. For the health survey, we're currently analyzing the data, keeping in mind that there's numerous outcomes, and we have the 2 populations, 3 populations, the Marines, the civilians, and the dependents. That's a pretty large effort. And our cancer incidence protocol, a draft protocol, was sent out for review to the expert panel that we met with this summer and to our peer reviewers. And we asked to receive their comments by the end of this month. We've already received 1 or 2. Any questions about that? Okay, moving along, I just wanted to discuss with you the results of our adverse pregnancy outcome study. It was published in November in the Journal of Environmental Health, and you can see its formal long title there. Okay. So the purpose of this study was to determine if maternal exposures to the contaminated drinking water at the base were associated with preterm birth, small for gestational age, reduced mean birth weight, and term low birth weight. And in a few slides here, I'll get into what we mean by those and further define those outcomes. This study is a reanalysis of a previous study which incorrectly categorized as unexposed submaternal exposures before June 1972, and that was based on the information available at the time. So that's one reason we wanted to reanalyze the study, and additionally, we wanted to reanalyze it because now we have the estimated levels from the water modeling. The previous study just used exposed, yes, no. And just to let you know, we used the birth certificate information and housing information from the original study. We didn't collect any new information on the births. It was just the exposure assessment that was different. So I'm going to quickly review the background on the drinking water contamination. I know that mostly everybody here is familiar, but in case there's some new people viewing the streaming. So there are 3 water distribution systems that serve most of the base housing. Those were Hadnut Point, Terra Terrace, and Holcomb Boulevard. And volatile organic compounds, VOCs, were detected in some wells in 2 of the systems, Hadnut Point and Terra Terrace, during the base's sampling program in the 1980s. So Hadnut Point started operations in 1943. It was mainly contaminated with TCE from leaking underground storage tanks, industrial air spills, and waste disposal practices. Vinyl chloride and DCE were also present in the water when TCE degraded, and PCE and benzene were also found. The maximum amount of TCE detected in the distribution system was 1,400 parts per billion in May 1982. Now, Hadnot Point served the Mainside Barracks and Hospital Point family housing areas. Prior to 1972, it also served family housing at Midway Park, Paradise Point, and Berkeley Manor. So Terra Terrace began operations in 1952. It was mainly contaminated with PCE from an off-site dry cleaner, and the major supply well for Terra Terrace was about 900 feet from the dry cleaner septic tank. The maximum amount of PCE detected in the distribution system was 215 parts per billion in February 1985. And TCE, DCE, and vinyl chloride were also present in the system due to degradation of PCE. Terra Terrace served the Terra Terrace family housing areas, and it partially served Knox Trailer Park. I just want to let you know, if you have any questions, you can just stop me at any time. That's fine. So I mentioned there was a third system. I'm sorry, skipping ahead here. So a little bit about how the contamination happened in these systems. Each system had many more wells than were necessary to supply water on any given day. So wells were rotated in and out of service, and water from all the wells was mixed before treatment and distribution. So the contamination levels in the drinking water distribution system varied depending on which wells were being used. And the most contaminated wells at Hadnot Point and Terra Terrace were shut down by February 1985. So I mentioned there was a third system that supplied water to base housing. That was Holcomb Boulevard. And Holcomb Boulevard served family housing at Midway Park, Paradise Point, and Berkeley Manor when it began operations in June 1972. It also served Watkins Village when it was constructed in the late 70s, and Terra Terrace family housing after March 1987. So as previously mentioned, prior to June 1972, Midway Park, Paradise Point, and Berkeley Manor were served by Hadnot Point. And the Holcomb Boulevard system was generally uncontaminated, except when the Hadnot Point supplemented Holcomb Boulevard during high demand in dry spring and summer months, and also during a 10-day period in early 1985 when the system was shut down for repairs.
I have a question. I keep finding, when I research, I keep finding different answers on how often that happened with the Hadnot Point was put.
The intermittent transfer of water.
Yeah. Do we have any hard facts on that?
I'm going to let Laura speak to that. If you want to come up to the microphone.
So I've introduced myself previously. I won't do that again. We spent quite amount of effort and time when we were doing the water modeling. If you go, I'll tell you where to find it, and I'll go into an explanation just so we have it. If you go to the Hadnot Point Holcomb Boulevard Chapter A report, there's a section on intermittent water transfers. And we had, I know Jason's here or not, he did, and Renee, as far as also look through all the files that we were provided, and we found times when there's a booster pump, I think it's 720, that was located along the pipeline between Hadnot Point and Holcomb Boulevard, that they would intermittently turn that on and off. And then there was also a valve at Marston Pavilion on the other side of the creek that they would also turn that on and off. And then we were able, from the information and data to gather that's in the report, and I can't pull it off my head, but it varied from sometimes 4 incidences per month to maybe 8, and the data is in there. Where we were missing information, which was sometimes a substantial block of time, that's where we relied on our university partner, and we used some probabilistic methods, Markov methods, and they're again explained in the text of the report, to estimate the number of times during the period when they are And all those are in a table in the report that tell you exactly how many times per month during this period of 1972 through 1985 that transfers were made.
So would you say that since you started your research that you found that it happened, it seems to me that we're finding that it happened more than we may have originally thought. Like it seems to, would that be a fair assessment?
Let me answer it in a slightly different manner, because from a scientific investigation, you try to go in objectively, not trying to think how many times it was or was not. Let the data speak for itself.
Right.
Okay. But for those who were here when we had the first expert panel meeting, we specifically asked that question from utility operators and all of that. And that is part of what elongated the process. And the answer came back that there was never any interconnection. Okay. As we started looking through the data and talking with them more and more, and actually talking to the operators, we mentioned or asked the question because hydraulically it was not possible never to open up that pump. There's a huge pump in there, and it was there for a reason. And we knew also that Camp LeJeune, their method of operation was to keep all the storage tanks full. They would never let them drop below a foot because of fire protection. So that they had to have water from someplace when they were running low. And it turns out that when we were discussing about transferring water, then we obtained firsthand information. Well, yeah, they would operate it so many hours a day during the dry spring and summer months to compensate, say, for filling swimming pools at Holcomb Boulevard or watering the lawns and the golf course and things of that nature. And so they would turn that booster pump on. And so that's how we did it. But again, there are periods that you'll see in the report where there's just as throughout this whole process, it's an iterative process, there's missing information. And so we went to some alternative or novel methods. In this case, was a probabilistic method to estimate when we did not have the information. And so I don't want to cite off the top of my head because I really I'd rather refer to the table. But the table will tell you how many times per month for the period of record that there were transfers going in. And it also gives you a step-by-step calculation in our rationale for how many hours the pump was operated.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. The Holcomb Boulevard system, when it was originally created, only had 8 wells. So until it was expanded. And that expansion wasn't completed until March of 1987. It wasn't until July of 1987 that they finally got smart and quit using treated water to irrigate the golf course with. They drilled a well by one of the water hazards, and they were pumping water out of that well into the hazard, and they were pumping the water to irrigate the courses. And then after July of 87, they were pumping that water out of the hazards to irrigate the courses.
And as former juvenile delinquent who used to steal golf carts at that golf course and ride around in the sprinklers, they use a lot of water in that golf course.
Well, there's 2 of them.
I'm talking about the
There's two championship courses there.
Right.
You got the Scarlet and the Gold course.
But the whole incident about the transfer pump was an example of, yet another example of asking the Sphinx the correct question in the right manner. And it all started out with the first statements by the Marine Corps saying that other than the January 1985 incident, we never used that transfer valve.
That was Mac Frizzell.
Yeah. And that was the directors of the utilities and what have you that were saying that to ATSDR. that Jerry and I found references about this booster pump that we brought to Morse's attention. Then they started digging, and then lo and behold, when we started talking to the people, or they started talking to the people who operated the plants, then we found out that this was indeed occurring at a more frequent rate.
But that booster pump was located at the corner of Holcomb Boulevard and Sneeds Ferry Road. It was right there in that little grassy area right by the edge of the woods. I remember taking the Washington Post reporter in there, and this thing was, at that time, this was in 2003. The roof was caved in. I mean, the thing was an eyesore. I specifically pointed that out to him. I said, why the heck would they be letting that thing sit there? Next time I went in there, it was a bare dirt space. That's where that pump was located.
Speaking of bare dirt, that made me remember one other thing I wanted to say. As we've talked a lot about the Torah Terrace School, my concern about making sure there's no children still being exposed through vapor intrusion. There's a Marine named John Olin who's been helping me, and he has. I think we may have better information on the location of the old school, and he has gone back in the Wayback Machine on Google Earth. And so I have some stuff I just want to give you to take a look at before I go email or just show you or whatever. I just don't want to forget that.
Olin was a dependent. He wasn't a Marine. John Olin.
Oh, sorry. You're right. But he's involved with the issue. He was a dependent. He went to the former daycare center that was a toxic playground.
Okay, then I just want to briefly go over the methods used in the study. We cross-referenced birth certificate data from Onslow County, that's where Camp Lejeune is located, with the Camp Lejeune housing records, and we identified 11,896 live singleton births who were 28 to 47 weeks gestation and who weighed at least 500 grams during 1968 to 1985 to mothers who lived at Camp Lejeune at delivery. 500 grams, just so you know, is about 1.2 pounds. And we started the study in 1968 because that's when North Carolina began computerizing their birth certificate data. And this is a data linkage study that did not involve contact with participants. We just used available data. And the outcomes that we looked at: preterm birth, that is being born before 37 weeks of pregnancy, small for gestational age, babies who are smaller in size than normal for their gestational age or their week of pregnancy, commonly defined as the 10th percentile, weight below the 10th percentile for their gestational age, reduced mean birth weight, lower average birth weight among a group of live births. So in this study, we compared the average birth weight among full-term births at Camp Lejeune who were exposed to the contaminated drinking water to full-term births at Camp Lejeune who were unexposed. And term low birth weight, so that's full-term babies who weighed less than 2,500 grams of birth, that's about 5.5 pounds. So as we discussed, there was very little measured data on the contamination, so ATSDR conducted extensive water modeling to reconstruct the past drinking water exposures at the base, and the water unique feature of all of the Camp Lejeune studies. And other studies that evaluated these associations did not have monthly estimate of the contaminated levels at the residence. Am I going in and out with the microphone? You're good. Yeah, sounded like it.
I thought it was me.
Okay, I guess if I feel like it's going loud, I'll speak louder.
I thought it might have been too late.
So to figure out which mothers were exposed and to what levels they were exposed to, we used address information collected from the birth certificates and base family housing records, and we combined those with the water modeling results. We linked each month of pregnancy to the estimated levels of contaminants in the drinking water serving that residence. And we evaluated each trimester separately and the entire pregnancy. And for each of these time periods, births were categorized as unexposed if mothers did not live at Camp Lejeune, if their residents at Camp Lejeune received uncontaminated drinking water, or if the mothers were exposed for less than 1 week during that time period. So I mentioned before that this study was a reanalysis of a previous study, and this slide compares the initial exposure assessment with the current one. And based on the new exposure information, almost 1,200 fewer births were categorized as unexposed. That's the last row of the table. And over 1,300 additional people were categorized as exposed to TCE because they lived at Holcomb Boulevard and received had-not point water before June 1972. So that's the second row there. You see previously it went from 31 TCE exposed births up to 1,342. And so because of this new information, we were more thoroughly able to evaluate TCE, and we also had a cleaner unexposed group. So just some information about our data analysis. We used unconditional logistic regression and calculated odds ratios for preterm birth, term low birth weight, and small for gestational age. An odds ratio compares the risk or the odds of disease among those who are exposed with the risk among those who are unexposed, and an odds ratio greater than 1 indicates a higher risk of exposure among those exposed compared with the unexposed. And we use linear regression for the mean birth weight difference, and we evaluate that as a continuous variable. We calculated 95% confidence intervals. These give us an estimate of how uncertain we are of the actual risk. A wide confidence interval indicates a lot of uncertainty about the risk and that the estimate's not very precise. Using 95% confidence intervals is somewhat arbitrary, but it's what's commonly used in epi studies. And we evaluated risk factors by adding them to the model with the exposure and seeing if including them in the model changed the results. The risk factor data came from the birth certificates, except from rank, which came from the family housing records, and we used that as a surrogate for socioeconomic status. And we used 2 criteria to interpret the findings: the size of the estimate, how large it is, and exposure-response relationships. And what we mean by that is that the risk of the outcome increases with increasing levels of exposure. The confidence intervals, as I just mentioned, were used just to indicate the precision of the estimates. We did not base our interpretation on statistical significance findings. We analyzed each contaminant separately, and for each contaminant, the unexposed group did not have any residential exposure to the contaminant under consideration. So what I mean by that is, for example, for the PCE analysis, the unexposed group meant that no one had exposure to PCE, but they could have had exposure to another chemical. And we divided the exposure group into 4 levels, and that was using less than the 50th percentile, so less than average, at or above the 50th percentile, at or above the 75th percentile, and at or above the 90th percentile. We did that for all the chemicals except benzene. The numbers were too small, so there we just used 1 part per billion as our cutoff, below that and at or above that. As a sensitivity analysis, when 2 chemicals were independently associated with the outcome, we put them both in the model to see how that would affect things and determine what had the stronger association. So what did we find? For small for gestational age, the odds ratio for TCE in the highest exposure category during the entire pregnancy was 1.5. We did not observe an exposure-response relationship. As you can see, the levels, the odds ratios at the lower levels are changing up and down, but at the highest level, it's 1.5. For preterm birth, we included mother's race in the model, and the odds ratio for the second trimester exposure to the highest category was 1.5, and it was 1.3 for the entire pregnancy. So for term low birth weight, the odds ratio for the second trimester exposure to the highest category of TCE was 1.6, and you can see we observed an exposure-response relationship, so with each increasing level of the exposure, the odds ratio is also increasing. It's fine if it stays flat, like 1.3 to 1.3, but it's not going lower than 1.3. So it can either be flat and then increase, but it never goes lower and then back up. And the odds ratio for the highest category of exposure to benzene was 1.5, and we consider that an exposure-response relationship as well. For mean birth weight and TCE, we included sex of the child, mother's race, and parity in the model, and we found a reduced mean birth weight at the highest level of minus 92.9 grams. And as I mentioned to you, when two of the chemicals were both associated with an outcome, we put them in a model to see how that would affect things. So they're both associated with both TCE and benzene were associated with term low birth weight and reduced mean birth weight. We modeled exposures over the entire pregnancy for mean birth weight and the second trimester exposures for term low birth weight because the odds ratios were higher in that trimester compared to the rest of the pregnancy. So for term low birth weight, risks for both contaminants were still increased in this model, but their odds ratios at the highest exposure categories were slightly reduced from when each one was just independently in the model. And for mean birth weight, when both of the contaminants were included in the model, we didn't see any mean birth weight deficit for benzene, and the mean birth weight deficit for TCE at the highest exposure level did increase. So every study has limitations, so just mention what we see here. We were unable to include births to women who were pregnant at Camp LeJeune but who delivered off base. We just were going by the birth certificate data that we had. We did not conduct interviews to obtain more detailed information on residential history or other maternal characteristics. Just want to let you know, though, in order for any risk factor to have a confounding impact on the findings, it needs to be strongly associated with the exposure. Also, since drinking water exposures could have occurred all over the base, some mothers categorized as unexposed may have had some drinking water exposure just during their daily activities.
So, Perry, I have a question about this. Specifically, my mom likes to tell the story about when I was born in 1974 at the base, and I was born at the base hospital, and the naval doctors screamed at her, no, go to Jacksonville, go to Jacksonville. And she would tell stories all the time about how the Navy did not want children born on base. They wanted them born in Jacksonville.
I'll actually clarify. Born on base, I mean the mother lived on base when she had the baby. The baby could have been born in the county at the hospital, but the mother had to reside on the base. So what I mean is if the mother was living at Camp LeJeune at some point during the pregnancy but transferred out of North Carolina, she wasn't living on the base, they weren't included. But those births at the county hospital were included. So just to summarize, maternal exposure to PCE was associated with preterm birth, that's births born before 37 weeks of pregnancy, and the strongest association was seen during the second trimester. Maternal exposure to TCE was associated with small for gestational age, term low birth weight, and reduced mean birth weight. The risk of term low birth weight increased with increasing levels of exposure to TCE during the second trimester. This finding is for term low birth weight is consistent with a study in New Jersey. They found an odds ratio of 1.23 and we found 1.6. The finding for SGA, small for gestational age, is consistent with findings from a previous study in Woburn, Massachusetts. That study found an association for small for gestational age and maternal exposure to TCE contaminated drinking water in the third trimester. That study had an odds ratio of 1.6 and we found one of 1.5. Maternal exposure to benzene was also associated with term low birth weight, and we did see an exposure-response relationship with the increasing odds ratio with increasing levels. These effects were seen in births during 1968 to 1985 to mothers who were exposed to the contaminated water while they're living on base. As mentioned, we could only start the study in 1968 because of the availability of the birth certificate data, but we feel that these results would apply to all mothers who are exposed to similar levels if they were living at Camp LeJeune during their pregnancy. We did not find any evidence suggesting any other associations between the outcomes and chemicals that we were analyzing here. So, because not many studies have evaluated maternal exposures to these chemicals in drinking water and adverse pregnancy outcomes, the studies that are out there are limited and inconsistent. We feel that these results add to the literature and just shed some more light on what's happening. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, this is Tim. I do have a question. Now, I just want to, it may sound like I'm dumbing it down here, but this is, what you show here is a exposure response relationship. We can derive from this an exposure response.
For some of the chemicals.
Correct. Yes.
And outcomes.
Correct. I want to make sure Mr. Floor takes this back to the other folks at VA, because there's been several denials that I've seen that say that there is no exposure response relationship. Here it is. I want to earmark this. I want to underscore it. I want to make sure that this gets back to them, because I've seen that phrase used a lot, and it's right here.
I really want to say thank you again for this work. I wish my mother had lived to see the science, because she, and like many women, blame themselves when they have something go wrong with their present pregnancy. And I also want to say that, that I have a lot of hope in the future with our new working relationship. And I think this is a really good example of where we need to, corporate America is even starting to talk in terms of using narratives and storytelling. And I think this is where we need to put that to work and make sure that women, when they hear the story of Camp LeJeune, that they can really understand what women were put at risk for, because every woman feels so strongly about their pregnancy and their baby being safe. And if they connect to themselves that just by drinking water they put their babies at risk, I think it will increase awareness, and it will help us gain advocacy in the civilian community. So thank you for the work very much. It means a lot.
Any final questions? Perry, any updates on the other health studies to share today?
We started with that.
Good. All right, we're ready to transition to the VA updates, and we're going to take just a moment to re-engage the phone line to see if our guests will join us.
Welcome to the conference. Your passcode has been confirmed. If you need technical assistance during your call, press *0. You are the first caller to this conference. Please wait while others join.
Okay, Brett.
I'm always on my own mic. We were asked by the CAP and by Senate staff to do a study on breast cancer, both female and male breast cancer, based on reported results in claims. So we have done that. We have not yet drafted the report to send over to the Senate staff. We'll have that next week. We did complete the review, and we started by going into our database. We have a unique diagnostic code for breast cancer. We also, if someone claims breast cancer or something related to breast cancer, we use a hyphenated diagnostic code with the build-up diagnostic code followed by the code for breast cancer. So we asked our database and asked our data staff to pull all of those cases, either with the breast cancer or a build-up diagnostic code, including the breast cancer diagnostic code. What we found was 117 claims from males and 89 from females. When we looked at the data, however, only 47 of the claims from male veterans actually had breast cancer. The rest of them were things like gynecomastia, breast lumps, nodes, things like that. But only 47 were actually breast cancer. Females, 16 of, actually there were 73 of the 89 females actually did have breast cancer. So when we looked at that, we noted that of the claims from male veterans, we granted 16 of those, which is 34%. Of the females, we granted 31, which is 42%. So the numbers were much closer than what they have been because of the variance and the non-cancer conditions which were noted in our database. So that's the report we will provide to the Senate staff next week, and certainly provide that to you as well.
Brent, what were the numbers again? 16 granted for male,
31, 16 of 47 for males, 31 of 73 for females. 34% and 42%.
Thank you. Now, are these Camp Lejeune unique?
Yes. Yes.
What about your overall numbers?
Overall for
veterans, overall. For breast cancer.
Just for breast cancer?
Yeah.
That's it. That's the number.
I'm not talking about Camp Lejeune specifically. I'm talking about veterans overall.
Oh, I don't know.
Where did you get the numbers that you quoted at that meeting where there was this huge disparity?
That came because, as I said, we have coded as breast cancer things like gynecomastia, breast lumps, things that actually weren't cancer.
I think back then you were saying you had 51 cases of male and 51 cases of female. So looks like the male cases dropped by 4 and female cases increased considerably 21. So I mean, the changes in numbers were more cases found, or just improper coding, or
improper coding, or not improper, but just the way we code disabilities. Unfortunately, data is not always my favorite thing because you can ask data 2 different days and get a different answer. When you got millions of people in your database, though, that's not hard to understand, I don't think.
So this is Tim. My question here is, how were the diagnostic codes arrived at? Were they from the doctor?
No,
doctor exam?
No, VA has a schedule for rating disabilities.
I mean, who associated a particular diagnostic code with the claimant?
The claims processors.
So it's the claims processor that did it. It wasn't a doctor.
No.
So
okay, we have a rating schedule. We have 15 body systems, and there are about 800 unique diagnostic codes in those 15 body systems. Arthritis, there's a diagnostic code is 5003. If someone has arthritis, that's the code assigned to that disability. There's a certain code assigned for breast cancer as well.
So let me take that example, arthritis, for example. How about difference between rheumatic arthritis, rheumatoid, and reactive?
There is a different code for rheumatoid arthritis than
reactive
osteoarthritis. Yes.
Is reactive maybe in there? Reactive arthritis?
I don't recall off the top of my head.
I do know that there's some illnesses that do not have a code.
A lot.
Yeah. So here's where I'm kind of getting to on the question here is who's assigning those codes, and is it possible that maybe they improperly are assigning the codes here? Maybe that may be an issue with the numbers. Is that possible?
It's possible, and it is the person who makes the decision on the claim that assigns a code on the rating code sheet.
I just want to understand it better here because there is a difference in the numbers, and I've seen a little. I wouldn't necessarily call it a trend, but I have seen at least a few cases where the diagnostic code didn't match between what VA said and what the patient's doctor said.
Well, patients' doctors normally use ICD codes, and we do not.
So if you could just give me a little bit of a difference there between the two, a description of the difference between
the two. They say they're unique diagnostic diagnostic codes, about 800 throughout the rating schedule.
How would they medically compare?
They don't.
They don't compare at all.
ICD-9 codes are usually, they're used for billing purposes, right? That's the intent of that. And they assign a code for a medical procedure, an x-ray, things like that. We do not. We identify diseases and disabilities through a unique 4-digit number. It has nothing to do with medical billing or anything like that.
I don't know, it seems to me that because of that there may be a gap, that there's some gaps.
I don't think so. I don't think there would be.
Okay.
But there is an ICD-9 code for male breast cancer.
I'm sure there is.
And so are there cases where a healthcare provider assigned an ICD-9 code for male breast cancer, but the VA assigned a different code?
No, VHA does use ICD codes. Because they see veterans, they treat veterans, and so they use the ICD codes. VBA, in making decisions on claims, though we have, like I said, a unique rating schedule with unique diagnostic codes.
Yeah, I agree.
Nothing
But you have a code
ICD
for male
codes.
breast cancer, right?
Yeah.
Are there cases where an ICD-9 code appears in a person's medical record that a VA claims adjuster would assign a different code?
No.
Okay. And do these claims adjusters,
Claims processors,
do they base their code assignment on a medical records review?
No, they base it on what we have in our rating schedule, the code in the rating schedule for breast cancer, for arthritis, for lung cancer.
So it is a different.
Well, it's not an ICD number. No, I said we do not use ICD numbers in the rating schedule. Never have.
Why you complicate things? Why
It's not complicated. It's easy for us. It's easy for our claims process.
Why don't you just take the code that the doctors put in there and use that?
Again, Jared, they assign codes for x-rays. That doesn't mean
We're not
anything to us.
talking about x-rays. We're talking about diseases. I mean, you don't have to use the x-ray code or the IV code or whatever. And use the medical code for the ailment and be done with it. You're creating a whole new.
We're not creating it. It's been that way since 1933.
Well, it's antiquated.
Who's that?
Karen Mason, I'm listening. I'm a nurse and I know a lot about the ICD codes, and the government doesn't use it because their systems are different and it's very antiquated.
Okay. Please don't chime in on the line.
Yes, sir.
Well, I guess what I had gathered and where I was going with this, you can probably see where I'm at with it, but is that you had several that were male breast cancer to begin with, but then some of them dropped off of being male breast cancer because they were coded to something different. And I was curious, who did the coding to drop them off?
Coded to something different. If someone claimed, there were claims for breast cancer from both males and females, but there wasn't evidence of cancer at all. But that was the claim. So when we decided the claim, we assigned our diagnostic code for breast cancer. But we would build, breast cancer, let's take, for example, it's, I don't know off the top of my head, 7646.
Okay.
I don't know. If someone claimed cancer and they had gynecomastia, we would assign a 7699-7646. 7699 meaning it's a build-up code. The person doesn't really have it, but that's what they claim. And in order for us to determine claims, we need to have that diagnostic code if we want to gather full data out of our database.
But how do you know it's gynecomastia?
Right, how do you know?
That's because the doctor would say that's what it is.
So it does go back to a medical record at some kind.
Well, of course we review medical records. Of course we do examinations.
Well, I asked you that a minute ago based on any kind of medical record assessment. I thought you said
of course. If you asked that, I didn't understand what it is. Okay. Obviously, someone files a claim, we get an examination, request a medical opinion, whatever's necessary. We review private medical records, of course.
I just personally, I'd like to say that I see a bit of an issue here with the recoding, and I think that it's found its way into other areas. That's just my suspicion.
I have a question. Can you tell me what the Committee on Contaminated Drinking Water at Camp LeJeune is?
I do not know. I've not heard that.
It is appearing in the claim denials.
I'm not aware of that.
I'll tell you what it is. It's the NRC report.
Yeah, there's been several denials that we've seen, and coming back from them, it says that it's citing, according to the committee, the Camp LeJeune Committee on Contaminated Drinking Water, and it uses it in caps like it's a title, and this is a formal group of some kind, and so that's why we're very surprised that you haven't heard of it.
Well,
It's in
I've heard
the
the NRC report, but I have not heard it.
Why are we calling it the Committee on Contaminated Drinking Water at Camp LeJeune?
Lori, I have no idea.
In fact. Okay. Up on the screen, Brad, is your actual website, the VA's website for Camp Lejeune Research and Studies. Okay. Who's operating this thing?
I'm clicking.
Yeah. Well, you need to. Okay. They've got these. Go for PCE. Click on that, please. September of 1997. That's what you've got up there for the most recent information on PCE on your current website. Okay? Let's back out of that and go to TCE. July 2003. I mean, it was declared a known human carcinogen on 28 September 2013.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Okay, let's back out of that. Let's to the last sentence in that paragraph. Up. Right there. The duration and intensity of exposures at Camp Lejeune are unknown. The geographic extent of contamination by specific chemicals also is unknown. This is where I come back to you and the VA and I ask the question, is somebody just lazy or is this intentional? And I ask the question, does the VA accept ATSDR's work as scientifically valid?
Absolutely.
Then why isn't it up here?
I don't know. But I'll take that back and have a discussion about that.
And I know that you like to try to put this imaginary wall between VBA and VHA.
There's no imaginary wall, but we have separate responsibilities.
You have separate responsibilities, but you're relying on medical people to give you advice and then to end the claims the evaluation process.
Absolutely.
Your subject matter experts are not subject matter experts, Brad.
Well, they may not.
They're not working off of the most recent data. And you sent me an email and said, although the last training letter from VA was issued on 29 November 2011, you currently have everything you need to legitimately adjudicate veterans' claims for Camp Lejeune. No, you don't. They don't. They don't even have the most up-to-date information. These studies, the water model was issued in March of 2013, and other studies that ATSDR has conducted, mortality studies, that all came out since then. There has not been a new training letter. How are these people supposed to have this information if you don't give it to them? That is my point, Brad. I mean,
Jared, I will take this back. Obviously, there needs to be some further trainings and updated to that. We'll get that done. And I've spoken to Dr. Cross about citing the NRC report. He agrees we should not. And it's just a matter of training our subject matter experts.
And you told me that Dr. Walter's training PowerPoint had nothing to do with VBA.
That's correct.
But you were at that training. And these clinicians that are
those two meetings was to explain, give them information on the claims process, and telling them how important it is that medical opinions are well